Morning, boys and girls. Today we are going to start our reading. We have two learning goals for today. The first goal is I can ask and answer questions about a text selection to help me check my understanding of the text, and I can make connections between details in a scientific text. So, how are we going to do that? We're going to answer the essential question: how can experiencing nature change the way you think about it? Here's a hint: become a naturalist and learn from encounters. So, what does that mean? A naturalist is someone who studies nature, often discovers surprising natural formations and unusual animals and plant life. A naturalist can learn from these encounters or unplanned and often unexpected meetings with nature. So, we're going to experience that through this hiker's eyes. So, how can experiencing nature change the way you think about it? So, imagine you are this hiker. He decided to go to a cave. How does experiencing life in this cave change the way he thinks about it? I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to study the photo and to think. As you start to come up with your ideas, I want you to drop them in the chat for me. How does this hiker's experience with nature change now that he's experienced it? So for me, I would think when I first think of caves, I think that they're dark, they're wet, they're filled with bats, they're scary. So now that he's experiencing it, he sees that they're really large, that there's light shining through it. At the moment, we don't see any bats in this picture. It's made with rock. I'm also wondering, like, is it loud in this cave? Is it really quiet in this cave? So he's experiencing nature. It may take that fear away because if I'm someone who doesn't like dark, wet places, I see that this is light, I might not be as afraid. Another thing is, while he's there, he might learn that there are plants that live there and grow. He might learn that it's a quiet place or it can be really, really loud. So there's different things that you can experience by being in nature that changes the preconceived notions that we already have. So awesome job. So part of this unit, we are going to learn about a new genre. This genre is called narrative nonfiction. So we will use this anchor chart and it can evolve over time. But for right now, what I want you to know is that the narrative nonfiction uses story structure to tell about real people, real things, and real events. It usually describes events in the order in which they happened and is written using information from primary or secondary sources. Authors who use this style of writing, remember that's called text structure, that style of writing, they might use chronological order. Some of you might remember that as sequential order, where you're thinking in terms of dates, time, months, signal words like first, next, then last. They might also use the text structure cause and effect. Remember, cause is the reason why something happened, and the effect is the result of what happened. So authors might use the words so, since, if, then, because, therefore. And authors using this text structure might also use problem and solution. Remember, the problem is something the characters want to fix, change, or figure out. And solution is the way that they solve the problem. So as we read today, we're going to be focusing on the genre, narrative nonfiction, and the text structure. We will have to decide what text structure our author uses. Again, that's chronological order, cause and effect, or problem and solution. So let's jump into our story. So the story that we're going to read today is Life in the Woods. So in this story, you will notice that there are columns on the left and the right hand side. At some point, I will show you how to get to your reader. And when you have it, you'll be able to take your notes in the margin. Until then, you're going to use a sheet of paper, or I may ask you to type in the chat to share your thoughts and your thinking. This will be evidence for me of your learning along with verbal participation. So the first thing I want you to do is where it says take notes. So again, on a sheet of paper, I want you to take notes. Decide on the purpose or the reason for reading, because that will help you focus on the topic's text. So I want you to preview the text by reading the title, the heading, studying the pictures, and then writing your purpose for reading or what you hope to learn. So I'm going to give about 30 seconds. Look at the title, A Life in the Woods. We have a subheading, Into the Woods. We see that there's a picture of trees. We see there's a man, and it's a black and white photo, so it tells me that it might be from long ago. We see another heading, Cabin Life. We see another heading, Walden Pond. And then here's a book, it says, according to it, that there's a book called Walden. So I wonder what that has to do with it. We see a bird flying what I'm thinking it might be a pond. And then another heading that says Back to Concord. So take about 10 more seconds. What do you think this is going to be about? What do you think you're going to be learning? As I read, I want you to also jot down any words that you think are interesting and any key details that you think might be important to our story. Everyone have their notes page together? Okay, let's begin. So again, thinking, how can experiencing nature change the way you think about it? So Into the Woods. Henry David Thoreau raised his pen to write, but the chatter of guests in the next room filled his ears. He stared at the page. Concord, 1841, was all that he had written. How would he write a book with such noise in his family's house? Thoreau headed outside, shutting the door with emphasis. He would have to find a place of his own. Thoreau walked out of town. Tall white pines soon replaced the painted houses. He listened to the rustling of the leaves. What if I could stay here, he thought. He could live off the land, close to nature, and begin his book. It would take work, but he could do it. Years passed, but Thoreau still did not have a place in the woods. One day, his friend, Ralph Waldo Emerson, had an idea. Emerson was a well-known writer who had bought some land near Walden Pond. Because he and Thoreau had shared the same interest in nature, Emerson decided to let Thoreau use part of his land. In March of 1845, Thoreau began to build a cabin. By July, it was ready. He could live and write in the woods. So we finished that first page. Now let's see. I'm noticing that the author has a word in yellow and bolded. And this is a text feature that we've learned in the past. So we know that it has to do with vocabulary. So we see the word emphasis. Let me read the sentence. Thoreau headed outside, shutting the door with emphasis. He would have to find a place of his own. So he shut the door with emphasis. So he probably shut the door really hard. And then he talks about finding a place of his own. So it seems like he's mad. Why is he mad? He shut the door. He was mad because, look, there was so much noise in his family's house. So emphasis is probably that he was trying to make a point. He shut that door really hard to make a point about his family being so loud. Great. So look at this next clue where it talks about finding the evidence. So let's start to prove some things to ourselves. So if after we read the paragraphs, look, we're going to look in paragraph 1 and 2. They're already giving us a hint that it's a cause and effect. So we're going to look for it. What was the effect of Thoreau walking out of town? Underline the text evidence. So let's see. It's not until the second paragraph that it talks about him walking out of town. So when he walked out of town, the effect is the what happened after as a result. Well, as a result of him walking out of town, there were white pines that replaced the houses. He listened to the rustling leaves, and then he began to think, I could stay there. So, because of all of these things, he decided that he could live off the land. So, we can say that he decided to live close to nature. Perfect. So let's look at the next thing. It wants to draw our attention to homographs. So homographs means that two words are written the exact same and they sound the same. So the word leaves has more than one meaning. We're going to draw a box around context clues that gives us the meaning. So when we find the word leaves, which is here, I'm going to box it just so you can find it. He listened to the rustling of the leaves. Well, I know one meaning of leaves is he leaves out of his house. He goes somewhere. And another meaning of leaves could be the things that grow on trees. So we have all of these leaves over here. And we know he leaves his house, and we know he goes in nature and there are leaves. But let's read this sentence to figure out which leaves definition we need. He listened to the rustling of the leaves. I think they're talking about the leaves in the tree. So the word rustling and knowing that he sees the white pines, which I know is a type of tree, and that he's in nature, lets me know that leaves means leaves on a tree. So then the next one is, let's look at paragraphs 3 and 4. We're going to ask and answer questions. So what question can you ask and answer about Thoreau? I'm going to give you 2 minutes to think. So what's something that you can ask and also find the answer to in this text? As you get that, I want you to type it in the chat, do the question first, and immediately follow it with the answer. Again, you have 2 minutes. Okay, welcome back. So I loved all the answers that you had. Here's one of the ones I pulled out from the chat. So one question that you can ask is, how was Thoreau able to work in the woods And I know the handwriting is sloppy as we write quickly. And then the response or answer to that question was Emerson let him use some of the land. Perfect. Some of you may have asked, why did he leave his house? Because it was too noisy. What's something he noticed in the woods? He noticed the tree, tall white pines. He noticed the rustling of the leaves. So these are all questions and answers. So think to yourself, how does the author's craft help you to visualize? How does he help you to visualize Thoreau's experience as he walks out of town? So one of the things that he does a really good job of is letting you know that his house is really noisy and that he's getting distracted. Also using the word emphasis lets us know that he's really frustrated with it and that he needed to leave. So I can picture his frustration, his needing to leave, and then going outside and hearing nothing but nature gave him the feeling that I need a calm place to, in a quiet place to work. I also think the author does a really good job with letting us know that he didn't have a place to stay, but he had to wait until his friend eventually said he could use a part of his land. So that was going to help make his dream come true. So let's look at the next page. The heading is called Cabin Life. Thoreau's move to the woods indicated that he liked to be alone, but Thoreau did not feel that way. I had a great deal of company in my house, he wrote. Red squirrels woke him by running up and down the sheer sides of his cabin. Snowshoe hare lived in the debris under the cabin, thumping against the floorboards. A sparrow once perched on his shoulder. Thoreau recorded these experiences in his journal. How easily writing came to him with beauty of nature around him. So, in the second paragraph on Walden Pond, Thoreau was a naturalist. He noticed the habits of animals. Each encounter showed him something new. One afternoon, Thoreau tried to get a close look at the loon, but the bird quickly dove into the pond. He knew loons could travel long distances underwater, so he guessed where it would come up. But every time Thoreau paddled to one spot, the loon came up somewhere else and let out a call, a howling laugh. What a silly loon, Thoreau thought. But after a while, Thoreau felt as though the bird was laughing at him because he still could not catch up. Thoreau wrote in his journal, his white breast, the stillness of the air, the smoothness of the water were all against him. At length he uttered one of those prolonged howls, as if calling on the god of the loon to aid him, and immediately there came a wind from the east and rippled the surface, and filled the air with misty rain, and I was impressed. So let's stop. Let's ask and answer another question. What is a question that you can ask and answer about Thoreau? Again, I'm going to give you 2 minutes. You have to put in the chat a question immediately followed by the answer. Remember, questions end in a question mark and the answer ends in a period. Great job, guys. So here's one of the responses that I saw. How did Thoreau feel about the animals near his cabin? The answer, he felt they kept him company. We see that he uses the word because. That is a good signal word. So that is our signal word that shows why he thinks the loons are laughing at him, because he still could not catch up to it. And you see in the front of it, Thoreau felt as though they were laughing. Why did he feel this way? Because he could not keep up with it. And let's talk about primary sources. So look at the text from Thoreau's journal. What impressed him? So when we're looking at that, this is what they're talking about. One thing that impressed him was when the loon howled, a wind came up and filled the air with rain. And the last part of the author's craft. Why might the author have included Thoreau's journal here? Well, Thoreau's journal is a primary source. It is what he wrote. So the author is going to want us to know that we're getting information in text directly from Thoreau, so we know his thinking and we have his own words. Let's look at the next page. The spectacular scene made Thoreau wonder about the loon. It no longer seemed a silly animal, but one with some mysterious powers. As months went by, Thoreau also became aware of each animal's ability to stay alive. His power of observation seemed to indicate additional senses. Emerson once remarked, "In winter, as he warmed by his cabin fire, he watched in awe as the moles warmed their nests by their own body heat. He understood forest life as never before." And the last heading is Back to Concord. These, like the geese that moved to new ponds at the season's end, so did Thoreau leave Walden. He had done what he had set out to do and had learned much from the woods around him. He packed his few belongings and his stack of journals and returned to Concord. Now he would turn his journal entries into a book. Generations to come would know life on Walden Pond. So let's look at and find the text evidence. What we're going to look at the cause and effect. Write a sentence that explains what caused Thoreau to understand forest life as never before. Take 2 minutes and I want you to think and drop your response in the chat. Write a sentence that explains what caused Thoreau to understand forest life as never before. So then you're going to think, the animals were able to use special skills and abilities to stay alive. And we know that Thoreau was able to discover this. He discovered this as he was observing nature. He spent a lot of time observing the animals, and the author quotes Waldo Emerson as saying that Thoreau's ability to observe indicated additional senses. In other words, Thoreau was able to notice things that no one else would notice. So one answer could be is he spent so much time in the woods. And he observed what they did. So by observing what they did and how they lived, he got a greater sense than you and I when we go outside and just look for a few minutes. He lived amongst the animals. So if we look at the next section, which is ask and answer questions. What questions can you ask to check your understanding of the second paragraph? Write your question. So what question could you ask about the section Back to Concord that would help you understand that question or help you better understand that paragraph? Again, take 1 minute. What question do you have? So I might ask, why did he leave? He loved it out there. He got a book finished. So why did he leave? And last but not least, I will end up asking you to do a summary. Remember, a summary. You can think of restating the story, and my goal is for you to at least retell the story in about 5 sentences on Thoreau's experience living in the pond. You will find this question in your Canvas page under discussion.